For 69 days, an entire corner of Minnesota looked for Madeline Kingsbury. More than 2,000 strangers put on boots and walked the cornfields. They dragged the river bottoms. They printed her face on flyers and taped them to gas station doors from Winona to Rochester. They prayed for a 26-year-old mother of two to come home to her babies. And the whole time, one of the people standing in that crowd already knew she never would. That is the thing that stays with you about this case. Not that a young woman vanished on an ordinary Friday morning after dropping her kids at daycare. People vanish. Cases go cold.
Fissure, a crack, on March 31st, 2023. Our lives will forever be defined in terms of before Maddie went missing and after. None of us will ever be the same people we were before this horrific nightmare started. Maddie was a deeply caring and thoughtful sister. She not only welcomed me with open arms to my family, but also had a special bond with my biological sister, Heather. After a lifelong battle with a rare autoimmune disease, Heather lost her life to leukemia. Her funeral was on June 7th, 2012, where Maddie shared a beautiful and compassionate poem she wrote to honor Heather. Exactly 11 years later, on June 7th, 2023, Maddie's body was found. Two of my sisters.
By the next day, the Winona Police Department was asking the public for help, finding a 26-year-old mother who had vanished into thin air. Within a week, the police chief would use words that turned a missing persons flyer into a homicide fear. The disappearance, he said, was involuntary, suspicious, and everyone was concerned for her safety. What followed was one of the largest volunteer search efforts the region had ever seen, a case that pulled in national cameras, and eventually a courtroom that the whole country could watch.
Katya's two young children. To no one's surprise, Maddie was often at the center of the cousin crew, being the energetic, fun, creative mom and aunt that we all knew her to be. I miss my conversations with Maddie about navigating the intertwining joys and struggles of raising our little humans. Maddie brought an enormous amount of light and laughter to our lives. Backyard games, pool parties at Grandpa and Gaggi's house, and family.
It is the kind of country where a body can be hidden a short drive from a person's own front door. This is farm and family Minnesota. Neighbors know neighbors. When something breaks the surface of ordinary life here, the whole community feels it. And crucially, the whole community shows up. That civic instinct is central to this story. When Maddie went missing, Winona did what small towns do. It mobilized. It organized grid searches. It filled Facebook groups overnight. It turned a private tragedy into a public mission. But there is a darker truth about places like this, and about domestic violence everywhere.
How it's not fair Maddie was killed, and how Maddie didn't deserve what happened to her. One of the most difficult questions she asks is, why would Adam do this to someone he had kids with and said he loved? It is this question and its answer that gets to the heart of the most insidious, secret truth within our society: domestic abuse and violence. It is a question I agonize over, and it is one that keeps me awake at night. My middle daughter, my youngest twin, had an immensely difficult time during the trial. She was often in tears, asking me things like, why did Adam do this? Why did he kill Maddie? Why didn't he tell people he did this so people didn't have to search for her? Why?
The one whose absence that afternoon was, to everyone who knew her, the loudest possible alarm. Because Maddie Kingsbury did not miss her children. Not ever. Not for anything. That is the detail investigators and family clung to from the very first hours. This was not a woman who wandered off. This was not a woman who needed space. A mother like Maddie does not leave two small children waiting at daycare. The moment she didn't show up for them, the people who loved her knew something was catastrophically wrong.
She also repeatedly asks, "Is Adam still in jail?" The underlying, unspoken questions here, of course, are, am I safe? Can it happen to me? During one of our cousin's sleepovers, my youngest daughter and Maddie's son Noah came into my room, both of their little faces streaked with tears. My youngest daughter told me through her sobs, "Noah woke me up. He is crying and asking for his mommy." As a parent of young children, I am no stranger to middle-of-the-night wake-ups or kids being scared or worried. I am supposed to simply be able to explain that monsters aren't real, that they don't live under our beds or in our homes. I am supposed to be able to add another nightlight, maybe make some homemade monsters.
For most people, a breakup is grief and paperwork. For a man built around control, the end of a relationship is not an ending at all. It is the moment the thing he owns tries to walk out the door. The evidence would show that Maddie had reported Fravel's behavior to the people closest to her. According to trial testimony and court records, she had told friends and family that if anything ever happened to her, he would be responsible. Think about the weight of that. A young mother, still alive, telling the people around her, "If I disappear, look at him first." She was, in the most literal sense, a witness to her own case before it ever began.
Difficult days are behind us. The generational trauma will likely be repeated in waves throughout the years, as each child eventually learns and struggles to process the entirety of the horrific truth and the gruesome details behind Maddie's disappearance and brutal murder. For me, the emotional burden I carry weighs heavily on my heart. I often robotically and mechanically go through the routine of life, searching for a sense of normalcy. I've been left with an inability to truly accept joy. I am often flooded with a feeling of triviality that seeps into the far reaches of my existence. My support system is largely comprised of friends and family who have also been deeply impacted. Previously sturdy core relationships.
Fravel left his own cell phone at home. A phone is a witness. A phone remembers where you went. On the one morning it mattered most, he stayed behind, silent, stationary, providing an alibi of location for a man who was not where his phone said he was. By that afternoon, Maddie had not picked up her children. By the next day, she was a missing person, and the man who had been the last to see her alive was about to step in front of the cameras. For the first days, this was a search. Hope was still allowed. Maybe she'd been in an accident. Maybe there was some explanation no one had thought of yet.
Gracefully holding hands with both my grief and my gratitude. However, there are many days where I stumble, and there are roadblocks I must continue to face. Even simply driving my kids to school can be triggering. On one road, there is culvert after culvert after culvert. Immediately, all I can see in my mind are flashbacks of Maddie's short, brown curly hair poking out of the top of the fitted sheet. Flashbacks of multiple law enforcement officers pulling Maddie out of the culvert where she was inhumanely stuffed and hidden. Flashbacks to the towel, tied, slip-knotted, extremely tightly around her face. I try in vain to forget the surreal feeling I had as I watched the horrific video unfold in the courtroom.
And second, on April 12th, roughly 2 weeks after Maddie vanished, Adam Fravel did something that would echo through the entire case. Through his attorneys, he issued a public statement denying any involvement in her disappearance. Sit with the timing of that. While 2,000 people were still walking the cornfields hoping to bring her home, while her children were still asking where their mother was, the father of those children put out a lawyered statement declaring his innocence. This is the turning point of the story, not a piece of forensic evidence, a performance.
Cruel. On the morning of March 31st, 2023, Adam seemingly felt entitled to unilaterally impart a death sentence on Maddie. Simultaneously, Adam gave each of us a life sentence as well. There's no parole for any of us to be released from this nightmare. This is forever our unthinkable reality. I am asking, pleading with the court today, to follow through with mandatory and maximum sentencing for Adam. Life in prison with no possibility of parole. Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Sonneman.
Your Honor, the next...
The community that had walked those fields for 69 days finally had its answer, and it was the worst possible one. The man who had stood among them, who had denied everything, who had let strangers exhaust themselves looking for a woman he had already hidden, was the answer. The case against Adam Fravel was not built on a single dramatic clue. It was built the way most modern homicide cases are, by stacking the physical, the digital, and the human, until the only explanation left standing was the one no one wanted. Start with the scene of the recovery. Maddie had been wrapped in a fitted bedsheet.
I have to think that there are a few things that's truly difficult to bear as the death of your child. The exception being that child brutally and senselessly murdered. It's an almost intolerable weight. Each morning my mind painfully adjusts to the realization that it's not just a bad dream. Madeline is still really dead and Adam Fravel killed her. My family bears it because we have to go on, but there's no avoiding the terrible anger, the tears, the gut-wrenching grief, the inevitable woulda, coulda, shouldas.
He acknowledged he understood why he was a suspect, because, he said, they had recently broken up. And then, as the questions sharpened, he shut it down. "My wall is up," he said, and he was going to have to get a lawyer. A woman was missing. Her children were waiting, and the last man to see her alive was managing his own composure. Because of the intense pre-trial publicity, the trial was moved out of Winona to Blue Earth County in Mankato.
Manipulated her any longer, he decided to kill her. He thought, incredibly, he'd run home to his parents' house and apparently just wait it out. He thought no one would care about what happened to Madeline. No one would be the wiser. She'd just fade into memory while he'd get away with murder. There's really no words to adequately describe what impact this has had. I've experienced many things that will stay. With a few examples, you can perhaps put yourself in my place. 69 days spent searching desperately for her. Nights staring out.
One friend testified that she had been on a video call with Maddie when Fravel struck her. Another testified to watching him push Maddie while she was holding their young son. Friends recounted him telling Maddie that she would not be leaving him with their kids. She had, in effect, been warned. She had warned others. And now those warnings were being read aloud in a courtroom she would never sit in. The defense called only a handful of witnesses. Adam Fravel declined to testify in his own defense.
Youngest child's obituary. telling my grandchildren they'd never see their mommy again because their father had hurt her so badly that she died. For my final goodbye to my beautiful daughter, I held her, talked to her, sung to her, and promised we'd get her justice. She was in a body bag. Megan wanted to see her sister's body. I begged and prevailed on her not to do so. Better to remember Maddie as she was. Not an awful sight that would scar her.
A man who cannot stand on his own, and who therefore cannot survive being left, will often respond not by working harder to keep a partner, but by working harder to own her. Dependence curdles into control, and control, when it is threatened, curdles into rage. Maddie had done the single most dangerous thing a woman in that dynamic can do. She had left. She had ended the relationship, and she was building a separate life, sharing custody, moving forward, reclaiming her own future. To most people, that is health. To a man organized around control, it is the ultimate insult and the ultimate loss.
Guilt, resolute cruelty, and pure evil. For me, certain proof that he killed Madeline, proof that he was glad he did it, and proof that he derives great pleasure from the carnage, destruction, and the grief he's caused. His only regret was being held accountable. The crocodile tears he shed in the courtroom the day the guilty verdicts came in were for himself. No remorse for what he's done to Madeline, to Ellie, and Noah, or the people that loved them. A word of thanks. Without the dedication of law enforcement, the efforts of thousands of community volunteers, the hard work of the county attorney's office and this court, he'd still be free and would most likely.
He performed the role of the bewildered, grieving co-parent, while he alone knew exactly where she was, because he had wrapped her in a bedsheet and hidden her under logs off a country road. That is not panic. That is not a crime of the moment. That is composure, and composure in the face of a community's collective grief is its own kind of violence. Every day he let that search continue was a day he chose his own comfort over the truth. Every hopeful volunteer, every prayer, every flyer taped to a door was a lie he allowed to stand, because ending the lie meant ending his freedom.
And always will be the apple of my eye. Her name is Maddie. Thank you.
Ms. Sonneman.
Your Honor, the next individual will be Megan Kingsbury Hancock, who is Madeline Kingsbury's sister.
It is the emptiness that domestic violence experts warn about long before it ends in a body in a culvert. The partner who needs to win more than he needs to love, who would rather destroy a person than be left by one. Maddie saw that emptiness up close. She tried to warn the people around her about it, and in the end, the calm that let him fool a whole community is the same calm that had frightened her for years. The most frightening thing about this case was never the disappearance. It was the face he wore while everyone searched. It was how ordinary he looked, how calm he sounded.
Dead, discarded in the wilderness, wrapped and duct taped into a bedsheet. How do I tell you how that has impacted me? For many days and nights, While Madeline was missing, myself and my family, we couldn't eat, we couldn't sleep, could hardly look at each other or speak to one another. We were robotic. Before Madeline was found, those 69 days were absolute torture. The world continues around you. People go to work, they run their errands, they go on vacation, they spend time with their kids, but you're there frozen in time. Life doesn't continue for you until you've completed the mission that you're on, and that was to find Madeline. For months, we lived out of hotels.
But a verdict is not the same as justice, and it is certainly not the same as repair. 2 children lost their mother, and in the same stroke, their father. A family that spent 69 days walking the fields now spends the rest of their lives walking around an empty place at the table. No appeal, no ruling, no sentence gives Maddie back her 27th birthday, or the graduation of her kids, or any of the ordinary mornings that were stolen from her on an ordinary Friday. What Madeline Kingsbury leaves behind is not just a case number.
I watched my parents crumble and disintegrate and turn into shadows of themselves. Their eyes having that 1,000-yard stare and just empty. Not knowing what to say or do and just being at a complete loss. How do I tell you what it's like to have Madeline's children, have to tell them that we don't know where their mommy is and that she's lost? How do you explain that to 2 kids that are so young? How do you explain to them that they can't ever go back to the home that they knew and they will never live with their parents again? I was not the one to ultimately tell the children that their mother died. My father and stepmother took that burden, but I've certainly been there for the questions and the wondering.